Sarah Martinez stood at attention in the military briefing room, her uniform crisp and her posture perfect. Around her, 20 other soldiers waited for their assignments. The morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. She had been part of the Special Operations Unit for 3 years now, but today felt different. Today, Colonel James Richards would decide who would lead the most dangerous mission their unit had ever faced. The colonel entered the room with his usual commanding presence. His gray hair was perfectly styled, and his medals caught the light as he walked. He was known throughout the base as a fair but demanding leader. However, Sarah had always sensed something in his eyes when he looked at her. It wasn't respect or confidence. It was doubt. "Listen up, soldiers," Colonel Richards announced, his voice echoing through the room. "We have received intelligence about a terrorist cell operating in the mountains near the border. They have taken hostages, including 3 American journalists and 2 aid workers. This mission requires someone with exceptional courage, tactical skills, and the ability to make life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure." Sarah's heart raced. She had trained for missions like this her entire career. Her test scores were among the highest in the unit. She had completed every training exercise with excellence. More importantly, she had already proven herself in combat situations during her deployment in Afghanistan 2 years earlier. But as the colonel's eyes swept across the room, they seemed to skip over her entirely. "The mission will involve infiltrating enemy territory, gathering intelligence, and coordinating a rescue operation," the colonel continued. "The terrain is treacherous, the enemy is well armed, and the margin for error is 0. One mistake could cost lives." Sarah raised her hand confidently. "Sir, I volunteer for the mission. My experience with mountain warfare and hostage situations makes me the ideal candidate." Her voice was steady and professional, despite the nervousness she felt inside. The colonel's expression hardened. He looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah could feel the tension in the room. The other soldiers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Everyone knew Sarah's reputation. She was fearless in combat, brilliant in strategy, and had saved countless lives during her previous deployments. "Sergeant Martinez," the colonel said slowly, "this mission requires someone with real combat experience. Someone who has faced death and didn't run away." His words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with anger and embarrassment. She had faced death many times. She had pulled wounded soldiers to safety under enemy fire. She had made split-second decisions that saved her entire unit from ambush. How could he question her courage? "Sir, with respect, I have extensive combat experience," Sarah replied, her voice still controlled but with an edge of frustration. "My record speaks for itself." The colonel shook his head dismissively. "Records and reality are 2 different things, Sergeant. In the field, when bullets are flying and people are dying, some soldiers discover they don't have what it takes. This mission is too important to risk on someone who might freeze up when things get difficult." The room fell silent. Sarah could feel the eyes of her fellow soldiers on her. Some looked sympathetic, others seemed uncomfortable with the colonel's obvious dismissal of her abilities. She wanted to argue further, to list every mission she had completed successfully, every life she had saved, every moment she had proven her bravery. But military protocol required her to accept his decision. "Sergeant Thompson will lead this mission," the colonel announced, pointing to a male soldier with less experience than Sarah. "He has the kind of proven courage this operation demands." As the briefing ended and the soldiers filed out of the room, Sarah remained in her seat. Her hands were clenched into fists, and she struggled to control her emotions. She had worked twice as hard as anyone else to earn her position. She had sacrificed everything for her military career. And still, it wasn't enough. Later that evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, staring at her service medals and commendations. Each one represented a moment of bravery, a life saved, a mission accomplished. But apparently none of it mattered to Colonel Richards. She wondered if he would ever see her as anything more than someone who might freeze up when things got difficult. What the colonel didn't know was that Sarah carried scars that told a different story. Scars that revealed the truth about her courage in ways that words never could. But those scars were hidden beneath her uniform, and she had never spoken about how she got them. Perhaps it was time to change that. The next morning brought devastating news that changed everything. Sergeant Thompson's mission had failed catastrophically. The rescue team had been ambushed just hours after insertion, and Thompson himself was now missing along with 2 other soldiers. The hostages remained in enemy hands, and the situation had become even more desperate. Sarah was cleaning her equipment in the armory when Lieutenant Davis burst through the door. His face was pale and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Martinez, you need to get to the command center immediately. The colonel wants to see you." Her stomach dropped. Bad news traveled fast on a military base, and she could tell from Davis's expression that something terrible had happened. As she made her way through the corridors, she noticed other soldiers speaking in hushed tones, their faces grave and worried. The command center buzzed with frantic activity. Radio operators spoke urgently into their headsets, while intelligence officers studied maps and satellite images on multiple screens. Colonel Richards stood at the center of it all, his usual composure cracked with stress and exhaustion. When he saw Sarah enter, his expression was a mixture of desperation and reluctance. "Sergeant Martinez," he began, his voice lacking its usual authority. "We have a situation. The rescue mission encountered heavy resistance. Thompson's team was compromised, and we've lost contact with them. The hostages are still in enemy hands, and now we have 3 more Americans in danger." Sarah stood at attention, waiting for orders. She could see the weight of command pressing down on the colonel's shoulders. Every minute that passed meant more danger for the hostages and the missing rescue team. "The enemy has moved the hostages to a more secure location deeper in the mountains," the colonel continued. "Intelligence suggests they're planning to execute them in 48 hours unless their demands are met. We cannot negotiate with terrorists, which means we need another rescue attempt." The room fell silent except for the constant chatter of radio communications. Sarah knew what was coming next, but she waited for the colonel to say it. "I need someone to lead a second rescue mission," he said finally. "Someone with mountain warfare experience and the skills to navigate this kind of hostile environment." He paused, clearly struggling with his next words. "Given your training and background, you're the most qualified candidate we have available." Sarah felt a surge of bitter satisfaction, but she kept her expression neutral. "Sir, I'm ready to accept the mission. What are the parameters?" Colonel Richards moved to a large map displayed on the wall. Red pins marked enemy positions, while blue indicated friendly forces. "The target location is here," he pointed to a remote area surrounded by treacherous peaks. "It's a fortified compound built into the mountainside. The enemy has significant firepower and knows the terrain better than we do." As he outlined the mission details, Sarah studied every aspect carefully. The plan was dangerous, perhaps more dangerous than anything she had ever attempted. The enemy would be expecting another rescue attempt. They would be heavily armed and prepared for an assault. The terrain offered little cover, and extraction would be nearly impossible if things went wrong. "The mission requires a small, highly skilled team," the colonel explained. 4 soldiers maximum. Any larger and you'll be detected before you reach the target. You'll need to infiltrate undetected, locate and extract all hostages, and neutralize any threats without alerting the main enemy force. Sarah nodded, already formulating strategies in her mind. "What's the timeline, sir?" "You deploy in 6 hours. The weather window is narrow, and we can't afford to wait longer." The colonel's voice carried the weight of urgency. "Sergeant Martinez, I want to be clear about something. This mission is extremely dangerous. The odds of success are ... uncertain. If you have any doubts about your ability to complete this operation, tell me now." For a moment, Sarah considered revealing the truth about her past, about the experiences that had shaped her into the soldier she was today. But she decided that her actions would speak louder than any words. "Sir, I have no doubts about my ability to complete this mission successfully," she replied with quiet confidence. "I request permission to select my own team members." The colonel studied her face, perhaps looking for signs of fear or uncertainty. Whatever he saw there seemed to reassure him slightly. Permission granted. Choose your team and begin preparations immediately. As Sarah left the command center to select her team and plan the mission, she felt the familiar calm that always came before dangerous operations. She had trained for this moment her entire career. Now, finally, she would have the chance to prove that the colonel's doubts about her courage were completely unfounded. But as she prepared for what might be the most dangerous mission of her life, Sarah knew that success would require her to draw upon experiences and strength that went far beyond her military training. The scars she carried held the key to her survival. Sarah carefully selected 3 soldiers for her team: Corporal Williams, a demolitions expert with nerves of steel; Sergeant Kumar, a medic with mountain climbing experience; and Private First Class Johnson, a communications specialist who could hit targets at incredible distances. Each had proven themselves in combat and possessed skills essential for the mission ahead. The helicopter ride to the insertion point took 2 hours through dangerous mountain passes. Sarah sat quietly, checking her equipment one final time while reviewing the mission plan in her head. The weather was deteriorating, with thick clouds rolling in from the west. Their window for success was closing rapidly. 10 minutes to drop zone, the pilot announced through their headsets. Sarah looked at her team members and saw the familiar mixture of determination and nervous energy that preceded dangerous operations. Each soldier understood that they might not return from this mission. As the helicopter descended toward a small clearing surrounded by towering peaks, Sarah felt memories stirring that she had kept buried for years. The mountainous terrain reminded her of another place, another time, when she had first discovered what real courage meant. But those memories belonged to a different part of her life, before she became a soldier. Before she learned to hide her past behind military precision, the team deployed quickly and efficiently, their boots hitting the rocky ground as the helicopter disappeared into the gray sky. Sarah immediately took point, leading her team through the treacherous terrain toward the enemy compound. The path was steep and dangerous, with loose rocks that could trigger avalanches and cliffs that dropped into seemingly bottomless canyons. After 3 hours of difficult hiking, they reached their observation point overlooking the target compound. Sarah studied the enemy positions through her binoculars while her team set up their equipment. The fortress was more heavily defended than intelligence had suggested. Guard towers positioned at strategic points offered overlapping fields of fire, and patrolling soldiers carried automatic weapons. "Count at least 15 tangos visible," whispered Corporal Williams. "Probably more inside the compound." Sarah nodded grimly. The odds were getting worse by the minute, but she had faced impossible situations before. Through her binoculars, she could see movement in one of the buildings that suggested the location of the hostages. Getting to them would require passing through a gauntlet of enemy fire. "Johnson, can you get us communications with base?" Sarah asked quietly. The communications specialist worked quickly with his equipment, but after several minutes, he shook his head. "Negative, Sergeant. These mountains are blocking our signal. We're on our own until we reach the extraction point." Sarah had expected this possibility. Mountain operations were notoriously difficult for maintaining communications, and the enemy had chosen their location well. Her team would have to complete the mission without support or backup. As evening approached, Sarah finalized their assault plan. They would wait until after midnight, when guard rotations typically created brief vulnerabilities in the defense perimeter. Williams would create a diversion on the south side of the compound while Sarah and Kumar infiltrated from the north. Johnson would provide cover fire from their current position. "Remember, we go in quiet until we locate the hostages," Sarah explained to her team. "Once we have visual confirmation, we extract them as quickly as possible. If things go bad, we adapt and overcome. Everyone comes home." As they waited for darkness, Sarah found herself thinking about the colonel's words regarding her courage. She wondered what he would think if he knew the real reason she never showed fear in combat situations. The truth was that she had experienced something far worse than bullets and explosions. She had survived something that made military combat seem manageable by comparison. At 0200 hours, Sarah gave the signal to begin the mission. Williams moved silently toward his position while Sarah and Kumar began their dangerous descent toward the compound. The moonlight was minimal, providing good concealment. But making the treacherous terrain even more dangerous to navigate, they reached the outer perimeter without detection. Sarah could hear guards talking quietly in a language she didn't recognize, their cigarette smoke drifting on the cold mountain air. Every step had to be calculated perfectly. One mistake would alert the entire compound and doom the hostages too. Execution. As they approached the building where they believed the hostages were being held, Sarah's heart pounded with anticipation and determination. This was the moment that would define her career and possibly save innocent lives. But unknown to her team, the enemy had been tracking their approach for the past hour. The rescue mission was about to become a deadly trap. The trap was sprung just as Sarah and Kumar reached the building containing the hostages. Suddenly, floodlights illuminated the compound and automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple directions. The enemy had been waiting for them, and now they were caught in a deadly crossfire with nowhere to run. "Get to cover," Sarah shouted as bullets whined past their heads. She and Kumar dove behind a concrete barrier just as the wall behind them exploded in a shower of debris. Williams's diversion had turned into a full battle on the south side of the compound, and Johnson's position was under heavy fire from guard towers. Sarah's mind raced as she assessed their desperate situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in an exposed position. Any normal soldier might have panicked or frozen under such overwhelming odds. But something deep inside Sarah awakened, something that had been forged years before she ever wore a military uniform, through the chaos of gunfire and explosions. Sarah heard voices crying out from inside the building just meters away. The hostages were there, probably terrified and believing they were about to die. She couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let that happen. "Kumar, can you reach that window?" Sarah pointed to a small opening on the side of the building. Bullets continued to strike their cover, sending concrete fragments flying in all directions. "Maybe, but it's suicide to try," Kumar replied, reloading his weapon. "There's no cover between here and there." Sarah looked at the open ground they would need to cross. It was perhaps 20 meters, but it might as well have been 20 miles given the enemy fire concentrated on their position. Any movement would draw immediate attention from multiple gun positions, but as Sarah crouched behind the concrete barrier, something remarkable happened. The fear that might have paralyzed another soldier simply melted away. In its place came a cold, calculating determination that she had discovered years ago during the darkest period of her life. "I'm going for the window," Sarah announced. "When I move, lay down covering fire and keep their heads down." "Sergeant, that's insane," Kumar protested. "You'll never make it across that open ground." Sarah checked her ammunition and prepared to move. "Trust me, I've survived worse than this." What Kumar didn't know was that Sarah's calm under fire came from experiences that predated her military career. When she was 15 years old, her family had been trapped in their home during a devastating house fire. Her younger brother had been unconscious in an upstairs bedroom, and the stairway was engulfed in flames, while firefighters worked desperately to reach them. Sarah had made a choice that defined her character forever. She wrapped herself in wet blankets and ran directly through the wall of fire to reach her brother. The flames had burned through the blankets, searing her arms, back, and legs with scars that she still carried. But she had saved her brother's life. Now, facing enemy gunfire, Sarah felt that same clarity of purpose. The physical pain she had endured during the fire had taught her that the human body could survive far more than the mind believed possible. The emotional trauma of nearly losing her brother had shown her that some things were worth any risk. "On my signal," Sarah told Kumar. She took a deep breath and visualized her path to the window. Every step was planned, every potential obstacle considered. Now, Sarah exploded from their cover, running in a zigzag pattern across the open ground. Bullets struck the dirt around her feet and whistled past her head, but she never slowed down. Kumar's covering fire forced several enemy gunners to duck, creating brief gaps in the deadly crossfire. Sarah dove through the window in a crash of broken glass, rolling as she hit the floor inside. She came up with her weapon ready and quickly scanned the dark interior. The building appeared to be some kind of storage facility, with stacked crates providing cover and concealment. Moving deeper into the building, Sarah heard muffled voices speaking English. Her heart leaped with hope as she realized she had found the hostages. But getting to them would mean crossing a central area that was likely defended by enemy soldiers. As Sarah crept through the shadows toward the voices, she reflected on how the colonel had questioned her courage. He had no way of knowing that courage wasn't something she had to find within herself during dangerous moments. Courage was something that lived permanently in her heart, forged in fire and tested by pain that went far beyond anything the military had ever asked of her. The rescue was far from over. But Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she would not leave this compound without every hostage safely in her care. Sarah moved silently through the building's interior, following the sound of English voices toward what appeared to be a reinforced room at the center of the structure. The gunfire outside continued, but it seemed more sporadic now, suggesting that her team was holding their positions despite being outnumbered. As she approached the holding area, Sarah saw two guards standing outside a heavy wooden door. They were relaxed, apparently confident that their perimeter defenses would prevent any rescue attempt from reaching the hostages. Sarah knew she had to eliminate both guards. Simultaneously, to avoid raising an alarm, she positioned herself carefully behind a stack of wooden crates, calculating angles and timing. This was the moment that would determine the success or failure of the entire mission. Sarah drew her combat knife, knowing that gunfire would alert every enemy soldier in the compound to her location, moving with the silent precision her training had perfected. Sarah approached the first guard from behind. Her knife found its mark instantly, and the guard collapsed without a sound. The second guard turned at the slight noise, but Sarah was already moving. Within seconds, both guards were neutralized, and she was working on the lock securing the hostage room. "American soldiers, don't be afraid," Sarah whispered as she opened the door. "I'm here to get you out." Inside the small, windowless room, she found 5 people huddled together, 3 journalists and 2 aid workers, just as intelligence had reported. They looked exhausted and terrified, but their eyes lit up with hope when they saw Sarah's uniform. "Are you real?" asked one of the journalists, a woman in her 30s with disheveled hair and torn clothing. "We thought no one would come for us." "I'm very real, and we're leaving right now," Sarah assured them. "Stay close, do exactly what I tell you, and we'll get through this." As Sarah led the hostages from their prison, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the building. Enemy soldiers had discovered the dead guards and were coming to investigate. Sarah quickly moved the hostages behind cover and prepared to defend their position. The next few minutes were a blur of action and violence. Enemy soldiers burst through doorways, and Sarah engaged them with deadly precision. Her rifle spoke with mechanical accuracy, each shot finding its target while she positioned herself to shield the hostages from return fire. During the firefight, Sarah was struck by a bullet that grazed her shoulder, tearing through muscle and leaving a burning trail of pain. But the wound barely registered in her consciousness. Pain was something she had learned to compartmentalize years ago, during those terrible moments when flames had seared her flesh while she carried her unconscious brother to safety. "This way, quickly!" Sarah commanded the hostages as she cleared a path toward the window she had used to enter the building. The outside gunfire had intensified, suggesting that her team was under increasing pressure. As they moved through the building, Sarah kept the hostages calm with quiet words of encouragement. She had learned during the house fire that people in crisis needed steady leadership and confidence to overcome their panic. Her own calm demeanor helped the hostages focus on following her instructions rather than giving in to fear. They reached the window without encountering additional resistance. But Sarah could see that the situation outside had deteriorated. Enemy soldiers were closing in on Kumar's position, and muzzle flashes indicated that Johnson was engaged in a fierce firefight with multiple opponents. "Listen carefully," Sarah told the hostages. "We're going to move to that rock formation about 50 meters away. When I say run, you run directly there and don't look back. I'll be right behind you providing cover." The first journalist, the woman who had spoken earlier, grabbed Sarah's arm. "What about you?" "You're bleeding." Sarah looked down at her shoulder wound, which was soaking her uniform with blood. "I'll be fine. Your job is to get to safety. My job is to make sure that happens." As Sarah prepared to lead the hostages across the dangerous open ground, she thought about Colonel Richards and his doubts about her courage. If he could see her now, wounded and outnumbered but still fighting to save innocent lives, perhaps he would understand that true courage wasn't about fearlessness. True courage was about acting in spite of fear, about putting others before yourself. Even when the cost might be everything you had to give, the most dangerous part of the mission still lay ahead. But Sarah felt the same quiet determination that had carried her through fire to save her brother all those years ago. Sarah led the hostages across the open ground under intense enemy fire, her wounded shoulder screaming with pain as she returned fire to keep their attackers at bay. One by one, the hostages reached the safety of the rock formation where Kumar waited with medical supplies and covering positions. The extraction point was still 2 kilometers away through treacherous mountain terrain. But Sarah's team had successfully located and secured all 5 hostages. As they began their dangerous journey toward the helicopter landing zone, Sarah coordinated their movement with tactical precision while tending to her own wound. The retreat through the mountains became a running battle as enemy forces pursued them relentlessly. Sarah's team took turns providing rearguard action, leapfrogging from cover to cover while protecting the civilians. During one particularly intense firefight, Sarah found herself separated from the main group, pinned down by sniper fire while Kumar led the hostages toward safety. As bullets struck the rocks around her, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had sustained her through every crisis in her life. The pain in her shoulder faded into background noise as she focused on the tactical situation. She had learned long ago that the human spirit could endure almost anything when fighting for something greater than personal survival, drawing upon reserves of strength forged in childhood trauma and refined through years of military training. Sarah maneuvered through the rocky terrain to flank the sniper position. The enemy marksman never saw her approach until it was too late. With the immediate threat eliminated, Sarah rejoined her team for the final push to the extraction point. When they finally reached the landing zone, Sarah's team fired signal flares to guide their rescue helicopter through the deteriorating weather. The aircraft appeared through the swirling mountain mist just as enemy forces closed within sight of their position. The extraction was completed under fire, but every hostage and team member made it safely aboard. During the flight back to base, Sarah finally allowed herself to acknowledge the full extent of her injuries. Blood loss and exhaustion caught up with her as the adrenaline subsided, but she remained conscious long enough to ensure that all hostages received proper medical attention. 3 days later, Sarah stood once again in Colonel Richards's office, her arm in a sling but her posture as perfect as ever. The mission had been an unqualified success. All hostages had been rescued safely. Her team had suffered no casualties, and the terrorist cell had been significantly disrupted by follow-up operations. Colonel Richards studied her face as he prepared to speak. His expression had changed dramatically from their previous encounter. Gone was the skepticism and doubt, replaced by something approaching awe and respect. "Sergeant Martinez," the colonel began slowly, "I owe you an apology. Your actions during this mission were nothing short of extraordinary. You displayed courage, leadership, and tactical brilliance under conditions that would have broken most soldiers." Sarah remained at attention, but she felt a quiet satisfaction at his words. "Thank you, sir. I was simply doing my job?" The colonel shook his head. "No, Sergeant. What you did went far beyond duty. You saved 5 innocent lives at great personal risk, and you led your team with the kind of courage I rarely see in soldiers with twice your experience." He paused, clearly struggling with his next words. "I was wrong to question your courage. I misjudged you badly." For a moment, Sarah considered telling him about the house fire, about the scars on her arms and back that told the real story of where her courage had been forged. But she decided that her actions had spoken loudly enough. The colonel now understood what her fellow soldiers had always known. Sarah Martinez was a warrior who would never quit, never surrender, and never leave anyone behind. "Sir, I have a request," Sarah said quietly. "Name it." "Sergeant, I'd like to volunteer for the next high-risk mission that comes up. And sir, I'd prefer if you didn't question whether I have the courage to handle it." Colonel Richard smiled for the first time since Sarah had known him. "Sergeant Martinez, I will never question your courage again. In fact, from now on, when we have missions that require exceptional bravery, you'll be my first choice to lead them." As Sarah left the colonel's office, she reflected on how the scars hidden beneath her uniform had finally revealed their story. Not through words or explanations, but through actions taken in the mountains under enemy fire. Sometimes the deepest truths about courage could only be communicated through moments when everything was at stake and character was the only thing standing between life and death. The colonel had questioned her courage and found it lacking. The mission had revealed what words couldn't, that some people are forged in fire and emerge stronger than steel.